Oh, thank you. We started several years ago. 2015 was actually the exciting time for us. I had been looking at our property at World Gospel Church and trying to look for things that we could do that would extend our outreach. And the thing that got me was maybe to start in on a garden project. And we started with a half acre. I took it to the deacons and the elders of the church, and the church was 100% for it. And we sort of semi fenced in half an acre of gardening, a garden space, and we got started in the spring of 2016. 2016 was sort of a slower year for us, but we were trying to amend the soil and get things ready to go. And but we got a hold of a ministry with a kids camp, which would actually they got a hold of us. Really, our hearts were really pulled toward 14th and Chestnut, and we started growing food specifically for 14th and Chestnut for the kids camp and also for the food pantry. And it's just been awesome. It's grown from there. We support several local ministries now. Covenant Cooperative is a new one that we just picked up. Camp Navigate a couple years ago, who is actually at our church this summer with about 90 kids. Last year, I think they had around 150 kids before COVID hit. And we just helped supplement Camp Navigate, 14th and Chestnut with the kids program to give them good food. So that we can teach different ways to prepare food, to different types of food to eat, and nutritional value, change menus, help amend things, and also financially it helps out those ministries. So anyway, that's kind of how we started, and we continue to expand. We're up to about an acre. I was just talking today about putting in an orchard at some point, which I'd be really excited about doing. And we've expanded to some. We've expanded to strawberries and we've got some blueberries started. We're huge into asparagus now, and we want to do a lot more teaching. One of the things I want to come up with is a cookbook, which I think would just be amazing if we could have just an inexpensive cookbook that we could hand out to the people, to food pantries and different families. If you know someone be interested in doing a project along those lines, that we could do from a microwave or a toaster oven, things that everyone would have, and then have some oven and cooktop recipes in there. Man, I think that would just be something that would really help us move forward. But anyway, I'm here to talk about fall cropping, and I could ramble on about our ministry and things all day long, but I want to talk about how I first got interested in fall crops. I honestly was not too excited about fall cropping at any point until a couple years ago, and that all happened because I had some plants donated from the Apple House locally, and one of them was bok choy, and I didn't know what to do with bok choy. I didn't have a clue. I never messed with it. So I went ahead and put it in the ground. I didn't have any idea that since it had gone to seed, there wasn't a lot I could do. I tried to clip some of the seedlings off and do some different pruning and stuff, but it just didn't work. And it ended up just going to seed in the place that it was, and I let it go. Well, I did, we were doing a little bit at that time. That would have been the second year. So that would have been 2017. So we were planting like some spinach and some lettuce greens and different things, doing some salad blends, but that was pretty much it in the fall, maybe a few radishes. And all of a sudden this bok choy comes up, and it comes up right near, of course it comes up right where I planted it, but it was right near the end of my spinach row. And so I recognized what it was, so I let it go, and we had the most beautiful harvest of bok choy off of that. off of that just volunteer planting from the plants that were given to us. So I was really intrigued by that. And so I started doing other things, and we ended up with a great grant from the community foundation here in Terre Haute. And so we put in some hoop houses, and I've been doing a lot of experimenting in the hoop houses. But what I find more and more is for people that don't have hoop houses, that we can just really push the envelope on these different fall crops. And I'm going to rattle off a list of some of the fall crops that we've had just really good luck with. And I know the Giving Garden there at the 4-H Fairgrounds does broccoli and cabbage. And broccoli is our primary fall crop. And the reason it is because our spring crops are really fairly limited with the heat. I found that with the season going the opposite way, that with weather getting cooler and the days getting shorter, that most of the cole crops like your broccoli, your cabbage, your Brussels sprouts, cauliflower, kale, collard greens, those type of things really thrive. I think we look at it and we say, well, if we plant earlier in the spring, and I've tried that. I've tried March plantings. I've even tried some late February plantings with coverings, and they do better if we can get them in the ground earlier and we can keep the soil halfway warm. But the problem is our days are getting longer and the heat gets more intense, and we just don't get the compact broccoli that we get in the fall. I mean, we get nice heads of broccoli, and then we cut that and we end up with 4 heads on the same plant sometimes that are actually the equivalent of 2 heads of the original. And then we get all of these clippings as long as we don't get a heavy freeze. And I've actually seen the plants wilted down to where you think, well, they're finally done, and we get just a little bit of warmth, and all of a sudden we've got another clipping of broccoli. Our broccoli in the fall has just been amazing. And we get our plants. I don't start plants. I don't have a great place to start my broccoli plants yet. I mean, I want to get there, but in the spring I can do it, but in the fall I just don't have a good place because it's too hot in the summer, and you really need to have something the temperature is moderated some. And Cox is up in Indianapolis, does a great job with their broccoli and cabbage, Brussels sprouts, cauliflower. And so I typically, if I run over to Plainfield and I get those off Cox's. So, and Green Magic is what I go with in the fall. That is the variety I go with. We've had really good luck with it. Usually on the cabbage, there's a couple different early varieties. Of course, most people know early Jersey, Wakefield. And we'll put that in. And Brussels sprouts are a little bit harder. You've got to go with an early variety of Brussels sprouts. They take a little bit longer, but man, they'll hold later than anything else. If you've still got viable Brussels sprouts on, even after a freeze, you can pick them. I've picked them right before Christmas one year. And we've had broccoli between Thanksgiving and Christmas a couple times. Cabbage, we've cut, the week of Thanksgiving. That was like the greatest treat for the people at the food pantry. We did a cabbage cutting and actually took it for a Thanksgiving meal a couple years ago. And of course, kale and collard greens. Kale, especially, most people know it's going to hold for a long time. And if you cover it, you'll have it next spring. So, any of the cole crops are really, really good for the fall. And I was just talking with Dana, and the thing is August 1st is kind of our target date. So I've come to feel like that is spring, like that's spring again. I get rejuvenated for August 1st. We kind of get through part of the hot season. August can be hot, but we know that we're heading more toward fall. I get excited about that. And I think that that's the hardest thing for most of us as gardeners, is like keeping excited for that long a period of time. With us wanting to produce food as long as we possibly can and feed as many people as we can and have food when no one else does, that keeps me excited. But for the common gardener, just experimenting on new things may be the thing that gets you to the place where you say, okay, I can push through. And I'm telling you, if you push through and you're out there in October when that weather is great, and you're out there and the weeds are not as bad, the bugs are not as bad, you're not fighting worms as bad as you did in the spring. You can fight them some in the fall. It just is this wonderful time to be out there, and I get excited about fall, and fall has become just kind of our go-to. I look at it and say, okay, can I have potatoes on Thanksgiving that I haven't brought over, that I haven't carried over from summertime? And so there's a lot of things that we do. So the first thing is cold cropping. So your broccolis, your cabbage, your Brussels sprouts, your cauliflower, your kale, your collard greens. If you have the right varieties, if you go with a little bit shorter day variety on the Brussels sprouts, then you can carry all that stuff into the fall, and you can carry it deep into the fall if you're willing to cover it some. And spinach for us, heading toward more of the leafy greens, spinach for us last year was just amazing. I planted a spinach crop way too late. It was not in the hoops, and it just barely got up. And it was probably about 1.5 inches, 2 inches tall, nowhere near ready to cut. And we didn't have a harsh winter last winter, and I didn't cover it. And we had spinach all spring off of that patch. So I know even 10, 15 degrees colder than what we had, if we would have covered that in the wintertime, even on a cold year, that spinach would have carried all the way through. And in our hoops, when we do a double covering. So we do fabric over the top. So we have an ultraviolet fabric that we go over the top of the plants. So we make these little wickets that are probably 12 inches tall, and they curve over the top. We drape the fabric, and then we have our hoop over the top of that. When we do the double shelter with the fabric and the plastic, we can carry all the leafy greens over, like your lettuce, arugula, spinach, mustard, and we'll have more than one cutting throughout the winter, usually 3, 4, 5 cuttings. Now, it is very hard to wait on it. It takes forever to grow. It's not like springtime. We don't have the sunlight that we normally have. So even though we can keep that ground warmth and we can keep everything there, as far as keeping it alive, it doesn't grow much. So you have to be really patient on it. So what we've started doing is we've started doing several plantings of it 2 weeks apart, so that we have an initial hit with our first or 1 or 2 plantings, and then we can do slow clippings into that and then do a rotation back. And so it allows us to have a lot more cuttings throughout the wintertime. So if you have the capability to do even like a low tunnel and then put fabric over it, over the actual plants inside, you can carry lettuce, arugula, spinach, mustard, any of those things, and especially butter crunch lettuce tends to really hold. You can carry them through the winter, and you can actually get some clippings and cuttings off of them in the wintertime, and it's pretty amazing. But if we plant our main crop of these in September, we're going to have cuttings all throughout the fall. And so we gear up for the lettuce, arugula, spinach, mustard, those types of things here in Indiana around the 1st of September is when we plan on planting those things to get a larger fall harvest. And then you can get into root crops like radishes and turnips and carrots. The carrots you're going to have to really watch on, when your maturity time is. They're not going to mature as quickly, so you have to plant those a little earlier in the fall. And last year we experimented with something brand new. We experimented with snow peas, and I planted them specifically way too late in the fall. So I did I think it was a second week of September planting just to see what would happen with them, and they were blooming beautifully when they got froze out. And I know some of you are probably saying, "Oh, they got froze out," but I don't look at that as a failure at all. I'm actually going to put my snow peas in this fall, right around the 1st of August when we start setting out our broccoli and cabbage and those things. So if you're going to plant from seed, for all your cold crops, you need to have your plants ready for the size to be set out seedling wise by the first week of August here in Indiana. You need to go with Brussels sprouts that are not going to be uh, take long to mature. So you need to go with more of an earlier variety, and the rest of those will be fine. And then your lettuces, your arugulas, your spinaches, you want to hold off until about the first week of September so that you've got nice cool weather. There's still plenty of time. We've got 6 to 8 weeks before most of those things would even have to be covered much, and you're going to get several clippings off of those into the fall. And then if you want to layer with the fabric and the hoop, then you can carry those things, or let your greens and your arugulas, your spinach, your mustard, those type of things. You can carry those all winter long and into spring, and really have a beautiful harvest in the spring and several smaller harvests throughout the wintertime. Um, and then, of course, radishes, you're going to be able to do the same thing. We harvest radishes last winter somewhat. I had a little bit of infestation of voles in the middle of the wintertime, so I lost some of my radishes. Um, but we had a really good harvest the year before, right in the middle of wintertime. I was pulling radishes in January and February, so um, that's that's a really good thing to grow. We had limited luck in the hoops with the turnips, but of course, turnips are fall crops, so we had a really nice fall harvest. And now I do an overseeding of turnips on the garden, so I don't even for fall, so I don't even worry about specifically planting turnips. I just kind of go out and pick the ones I want with my cover crop. So again, we're going to try snow peas this year on August 1st, and we'll see how they do into the fall. And then some of the things that we're getting into that are really non-traditional fall crops. I was just talking about how I planted corn 2 days ago, and I've told several people that, and they think I'm crazy, but last year, my best corn crop I planted on July 5th, and it was an early Illini extra sweet. And so I pushed it this year to July 19th. I've got corn that's just barely coming up from the planting prior to this. The thing is, if you're going to do fall corn, and most of you would know this, and it's just logical. Just go with a 65 to 70-day corn. I planted 68-day corn in the second week of June this year, and it's tasseling. Now, I know that corn is going to be ready at 68 days or prior. The same corn I planted April 4th this year, and it got through 2 freezes. The same variety of corn, it's ambrosia. It got through 2 freezes this spring, but it took almost 80 days to mature. So we have to think that way in the fall too. We're going to lose daylight. We're going to lose warmth. And when we plant things like corn, that warmth and that daylight really kick in. So like my ambrosia corn is going to be ready now because it's been through all this heat and plenty of rain. It's probably going to be ready in that 63 to 65 day time frame. So it's actually going to be a few days before what it's listed as maturity time. But in the fall, I plan on it taking almost 80 days. If I plant in early spring, it's going to take 78 to 80 days. Those are things that you have to think about when we're really trying to cramp the time frame down in. We don't have to worry about that with cooler crops as much, but the ones that need warmth, we just have to realize it's going to take a little bit longer for them to mature without the daylight and the heat, but it can still be done. And so I'm going to see what my sweet corn does on the 19th. I'm hoping that someday that I might find a variety that I can actually plant in my fall planting, which starts in August. So We're going to see if that ever happens. Of course, that's totally dependent upon the weather in a year. And I just want to encourage you that if you're going to try this, there's not going to be a failure. You are not going to fail. Your plants are not going to be a failure. The peas last year were not a failure. They were a learning process, and that's what all of this is. And it's like the freeze we had this year on May 2nd. The potatoes were completely destroyed. They looked like they were absolutely gone. I covered so many other plants, but I thought, I've never lost potatoes before. I don't have enough covering. I'm going to leave those. And they were froze off at the ground. And we all know that had potatoes that were froze off, that they quickly came back. 10 to 14 days, they looked exactly the way they did 10 to 14 days prior. And I'm harvesting the most beautiful red Pontiac potatoes I've ever had this year. So there is no failure. We learn from these things. I had no idea that you could freeze potatoes off at the ground and they would come right back. I was hopeful, but I wasn't sure. And I've learned now that it's okay if that happens. And I learned it was okay that when I planted my peas on August, or actually in September, and they were burnt off in late October, early November, that I learned from that. And I think, okay, even though I figured they would get frozen, it gave me a day time frame to learn from, to say, okay, if I put those out with my broccoli and cabbage around August 1st, I'm probably going to have a harvest in the fall, because they were looking great prior to the freeze. So it's all learning. And you don't look at it and say, well, I lost this and I lost that. You look at it as, I learned this and I learned that. And so I really encourage you to just try new things. One of the things that we do too, I wanted to mention today, is I will take, when I dig my potatoes, invariably, because I do reds, I do exclusively reds, and they grow really close to the surface of the ground. No matter how much I hill them, I always get a few surface potatoes. And I take the ones that are sprouting because they're close to the surface and they get some sunlight, and I put those aside. And oftentimes I'll put those back into the ground, right in the same area or in between the rows that were there before. And I go ahead and hill them, and I see what happens. And we've had some really beautiful fall crops of potatoes around Thanksgiving. So I encourage you to do that with potatoes. Try the sweet corn. Plant your green beans all the way up into mid-August. They're going to produce for you, especially if you pick something like Provider, which is what we use a lot of for our bush beans. They're about a 50 to 52 day bean. You're going to get plenty of beans if you plant mid-August. We usually do, well, this year we're doing about 7 or 8 plantings. So I just pulled the beets today. As soon as it's dry enough, I'm going to plant more beans in the place of the beets. So with that, when we're doing all these replants, you need to make sure that you amend the soil each time. So amend the soil so that we're not just totally zapping the soil. I've got 2 areas right now in the garden that we have overused, and those are going, I'm not doing a second planting there at all. They're going straight to cover the crop for the fall. So as soon as I get those areas cleared off, they're going to be covered with clover and turnips and that sort of thing. So and then some of the other plants that I've had good success with in the fall are fall cucumbers. So you can plant those in your August first planting. Zucchini all the way up into mid-August, especially summer squash, which comes on just slightly before zucchini usually. Summer squash does really good in the fall time. So these are just some of the things that we have tried. We're going to try a lot more. We're going to continue to push the envelope both directions. It has been our goal from day one to have food for people that can afford it, good, solid vegetables for people in the fall and spring, and to try to keep as many of the vegetables preserved by freezing. Hopefully someday we'll do some canning into the winter time so that we can get food to people that just can't go to the store and buy it. And it keeps them eating healthy and there's not as big a window in between the times that they don't have that opportunity to eat healthy. And as we continue to close that window, they're more mindful. We're seeing that people are a little more mindful of what they're putting in their body and what they're preparing and eating. So those things are all really encouraging. I've just got a couple minutes here, but I want to leave you with this. I am no expert on any of these things. I think if most of you are honest with yourself, you're probably not as great an expert as what you would want to be. I'm always learning more, but the thing is I'm really encouraged about growing more and feeding more people. And that's what my drive is. Your drive may be that I want to have this food for my family in the fall. I want to have this food for my neighbors in the fall. And if you're a producer, maybe it's that I want to have a crop that I can get premium price on in a time of year when no one else has. That's kind of how I've handled my ministry, is that I feel like it's the things that we have are more valuable when no one else has them available. And I know it's the same way that the business works. So I encourage you to try it. Don't get discouraged. Don't get down when it fails, and leave yourself just a little bit of energy going into the fall time so that you can carry it through. You won't have as many weeds. You won't have as many bugs to deal with, and it'll be nice and cool for you to be out there gardening. So take care. Thank you.
All right. Let me start my video again. Did we have any questions for Bret? You're more than welcome to just unmute yourself. And if not, I have a question. Can you elaborate a little bit more about insect pressure that you saw and whether or not it was an issue?
Well, you're still going to have your cabbage worms, and broccoli is going to be at times going to be an issue because you're in hot weather when you start, and so those things are going to start. Now they're not going to. Usually, I don't have any pressure until heads start forming, or or we start seeing a little bit of broccoli forming. And BT's been my thing. I mean, I've used Thuricide for years now on the cabbage worms and the loopers and that kind of thing. So I haven't had any issues. That's taking care of that. And the nice thing is usually it's one spray and you're done. I don't have any issues past that. And the other thing is I have had some fungus issues on those same crops in the spring, especially on really wet years. And we're in heavy clay soil where we're at, so we typically have some fungus issues. And I've had no fungus issues on those crops in the fall. So that's another advantage that I didn't mention earlier. So.
I have a question.
Okay.
I have a small greenhouse. Would I start that type of stuff in the greenhouse about the same time as you're talking about, like August? Well, the things you said to plant in August, or?
You would want to have your seedlings ready in August. So you're probably looking at about a month before that.
Uh-huh.
So we're 2 or 3 weeks past time now of where you would have wanted to start the seedlings as far as the broccoli and cabbage.
Mm-hmm.
But some of those plants are available around. I'm trying to get Tom at the Apple House to carry some, but I know it's hard because he has to order so much, and there's just not very many people that are purchasing that time of year. So Cox's has been my go-to in Plainfield for a long time to get those plants. I'm hopeful to have a good place in place by next year to where I don't have to buy them. But if I was starting the seedlings from seed, I would start around July 1st. And Phil has a little bit more experience with that. Phil Small does. He's got his own plants. So I know he's had those started, and he's ready to go to put them out pretty soon. So.
And what about growing that type of stuff in the greenhouse in the winter?
As far as cold crops in the winter, the only thing I've ever had success with in greenhouse has been kale. You can carry the kale all winter long, but it's going to get too cold even for your cabbage and broccoli. And the thing is cabbage and broccoli eventually just goes dormant, and so it stops growing. Now, I haven't experimented far enough to know if you could get it to actually survive till spring, to where once it picked up a little bit and your days started getting longer, that you could have a super early crop in the spring. I haven't experimented that far yet, but I have experimented enough to know that it doesn't hold well into the winter. But kale will. I mean, kale will hold in the greenhouse, especially with the covering over it.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
We had a question in the chat. What do you have you amended your clay soils, and what have you used?
Okay, I've used cow manure. I have used a ton of peat moss to loosen up the soil. But I think the biggest thing with clay soil is it tends to be very, very acidic. You need to have a good test on it to see where your pH level is. And it's going to take a lot of lime to get that pH level. Now, amending some with your compost is going to help your pH level some. But if you're going to want an immediate response, you're going to have to use lime or calcium to get that pH level changed quickly. Ours was actually ridiculous when I started. It was 4.4 to 4.6. I mean, it was so acidic. And the first year I added enough lime that we actually grew a garden on it and had a decent crop. So, but we're hovering around 6.5 now. And it's really tough to push clay much past 6.5. So there's certain things that like 6.8 a little bit better, but it's tough to get it much past that. And I love my clay soil. A lot of people hate it. Okay, they don't like working with it, but if you work it right in the spring, and what I mean that is don't work it too wet. That's the problem. When we work it too wet, it becomes heavy. If we work it at the right time and it gets those nice spring rains on it, you rarely will have to water in the summertime. And vegetables will hold in it so much longer than you will in like sandy looms and that kind of thing. So I grew up with clay. I've messed with it, most of my life. So I like amending the soil and making it softer with peat moss and that type of thing, and especially your compost. But I don't dislike my clay soil. I like it. So just work it at the right time. Be patient in the spring. Don't work it too early. So,
in your experience, what is a good variety of spinach for salad?
Do you like large leaf or small leaf?
Oh, this is from the chat.
Oh, okay.
I'm going to gamble and say small leaf.
Okay. Well, for larger leaf, I grow a lot of Bloomsdale. Just because the seed's easy to get and I usually get it free. So I plant a lot of Bloomsdale, and it's a thicker leaf. It's a heavier leaf. Some people like that. Some people don't. I don't have a particular small variety that I go to. What you need to do is you need to check with 2 or 3 different varieties and see what works best for you and best for your soil. Honestly, small varieties on my clay soil don't do as well as my larger varieties, so I've kind of gotten away from them. And so we're almost exclusively in the larger leaf spinaches now. But the nice thing about the larger leaf spinach, at one time it's a small leaf. So you can cut it when it's small, and don't worry about cutting it when it's small. It doesn't have to get big. And depending on what your salad mix is that's when I cut it. I like to have 2 or 3, 4 different blends of salad throughout the year. I'll do something where I'll let some of the lettuces almost head out to where, you know, something's a little bit heavier. And then I also do almost down to what I call a semi-microgreen, which is just tiny clippings, and it's super tender. And you can add that to other salads, which is kind of what we have to do at the food pantry, because there's so much iceberg that's available that has no nutritional value. So I bring something that's like tender and tasty and say, why don't you mix this with that stuff over there and get yourself some nutrition out of it. And typically people that are not used to eating salad still like it. So we do 2 or 3 different ways of doing things, but I go with larger leaf spinach and just cut it early is what I do. So.
Did we have any more questions for Bret? All right. I think that can comfortably conclude this evening's presentation. So thank you very much for joining us. I will be, this has been recorded. I will make the recording accessible on YouTube. I will send it to all the people that registered, and I will post it on the Vigo County Purdue Extension Facebook page so that people can see it and view it at their leisure. So thank you very much. Have a wonderful afternoon, and maybe jump into some fall gardening.